My name is Ellie, and if you told me 3 years ago that I'd be in this mess, I'd have laughed. 3 years, that's all it took for my life to turn from a romantic comedy into some daytime soap opera. It started with Jake, my husband, or as I now like to call him, the man-child I married. We met at a friend's barbecue, and he was the life of the party. Always smiling, always easygoing. Or so I thought. The wedding was a dream, but dreams end, and reality hits hard. I remember the first time I asked him to cook something, and he looked at me like I'd asked him to solve a math equation. "Ellie, babe, you know I can't cook," he said, with that sheepish grin that I mistook for charm. "But Jake, you've got to learn. I can't cook every night," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "I can barely make toast, Ellie. Why change now?" He shrugged, and that was that. And so it went. I'd come home from work, tired from the day, hoping for a moment to relax. But instead, I'd find Jake, on the couch, controller in hand, waiting for me to serve dinner like some 1950s housewife. I worked my way up in the company, aiming for that promotion. It was hard, but I thought at least I had Jake's support. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon and terrified. I thought maybe this would make Jake step up, but even that was like hoping for a snowstorm in July. We had Ava, our little bundle of joy and love. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thought to us. But Jake, well, he thought differently. "You know, you make more money than me. It makes sense for you to go back to work," he said one evening as we sat exhausted on the couch, Ava finally asleep. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I was the only adult in the house. "Jake, being a stay-at-home dad means actually doing things at home, you know?" He just nodded, eyes already drifting back to his game. Yeah, I got it." But he didn't got it. Not really. His mom, bless her, would come over to help, actually to do his job. She was a saint, loved Ava to bits, loved me too, in her own way. She'd shake her head at Jake, whispering, "You got your father's brains, but none of his sense." Then, like some cruel twist of fate, Jake's parents passed away. Within a month of each other, like they couldn't live without the other. I was heartbroken. They were the parents I never had. Jake, though, he just saw dollar signs. The day he told me he wanted a divorce, it was like any other Tuesday. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Ava was drawing at the kitchen table, and Jake strolled in like he owned the place. "I want a divorce, Ellie," he said, not a hint of emotion in his voice. I stopped chopping. "What?" "I'm getting the inheritance, the house. I don't need this. Any of this." He gestured around, at the home we built, at our life. "You mean you don't need us?" I said, my voice low, trying to keep it together for Ava's sake. "Yeah, something like that," he shrugged. And just like that, the illusion shattered. There was no happily ever after waiting for me. Just a grown man walking out the door, leaving his wife and daughter behind, chasing after the ghost of money yet touched. That was the beginning of the end. Or maybe it was a new beginning. Just not the one I expected. The night Jake left, I sat on the edge of Ava's bed, watching her sleep. My mind raced with what I needed to do next. The thought of divorce had danced around my head before, but now it was a music blaring full volume. I had wanted to do it, to break free from the man who couldn't even fry an egg, but then Ava came along, and she changed everything. I remember the morning after he left. I was sipping my coffee, the silence of the apartment pressing down on me. Ava was at my feet, playing with her blocks, oblivious to the storm in her mother's heart. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" she asked, looking up at me with those big, curious eyes. "He's gone to stay somewhere else for a while," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Why?" she pressed, in that innocent way kids do when they sense a deeper story. "Sometimes people need a little time apart," I said, hoping she'd let it go. "Will he come back?" Her voice was small, worried. I sighed. "I don't know, sweetheart, I don't know." That day at work was a blur. I was there physically, but my mind was a million miles away. When I finally got home, the loneliness of the empty apartment was a slap in the face. I had to do something, anything. I called my sister Laura, the one who always seemed to have her life together. "Laura, it's Ellie. Jake left," I blurted out as soon as she picked up. "Ellie, what happened?" Laura's voice was a mix of concern and, "I told you so." "He wants a divorce," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. There was a pause and then, "Are you okay?" "No, not really, but I will be. I have to be for Ava," I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I had. "You're better off without him, Ellie. You know that, right?" Laura's voice was firm now, the big sister coming through. "Yeah, I guess I do." "Good. Now let's talk about what you're going to do next." And we did. We talked about lawyers, about finances, about how I was going to navigate being a single mom. Laura was a rock, and I clung to her advice like a lifeline. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings and paperwork. Divorce is like that. A lot of hurry up and wait, mixed with moments of heartache. I was angry, more than I thought possible, but underneath that anger was a resolve forming. I was going to get through this, not just for me, but for Ava. She deserved a life free from the chaos her father brought. Ava, she was my light in the darkness. Her laughter, her smile, they kept me going when all I wanted to do was curl up and hide from the world. One evening, as I was putting her to bed, she looked at me with those big, wise beyond her years eyes and said, "Mommy, I don't need Daddy. I just need you." And just like that, the edge of decision wasn't so sharp anymore. I knew what I had to do. I was going to fight for a better life, for both of us. It was time to let go of the life I thought I wanted, and embrace the one waiting for us. Just me and Ava against the world. The divorce papers sat heavy on the kitchen table, like unwanted guests that wouldn't leave. It's funny how a few sheets of paper can turn your world upside down. Ava was at daycare, giving me a few hours of silence to think, or maybe to avoid thinking. The apartment felt empty, echoes of the life we used to have bouncing off the walls. I tried to keep things normal for Ava's sake. But every night, when I'd put her to bed and sit down to face the evening alone, the silence screamed at me. I had to do something with my hands, keep busy, so I started fixing things around the house, stuff that Jake never got around to doing. One Saturday, the sink decided to start leaking, a steady drip-drip that drilled into my brain. I had half a mind to call Jake and demand he come fix it, just out of spite. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself in the hardware store, standing in an aisle of pipes and wrenches, feeling out of my depth. "Need some help?" A voice broke through my confusion. I looked up to see a woman, about my age, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, a name tag that read Maggie. "Yeah, my sink's leaking, and I don't even know where to start," I admitted. Maggie smiled. "Let's start with the basics then. You got a wrench?" Back home, armed with my new tools and a hastily scribbled set of instructions, I tackled the sink. It took me 3 tries and a lot of muttered curses, but I fixed it. There was a small sense of victory, standing there, watching the water run smoothly without a single drop escaping. My phone rang, shattering the moment. It was Jake's aunt, Linda. I hesitated before answering. She'd been caught in the middle of all this, wanting to support her nephew, but knowing he was in the wrong. "Ellie, it's Linda. I was just wondering how you and Ava are doing." Her voice was tentative, like she was walking on a tightrope. "We're managing, Linda. How are you holding up?" It's been hard. I miss seeing Ava." The guilt hit me then. Despite everything, Linda loved Ava, and Ava loved her. "Why don't you come over for tea tomorrow? Ava would love to see you." "Really? I'd like that, Ellie. Thank you." It wasn't just the broken sink that got fixed that day. Linda came over the next afternoon, and for a couple of hours, our little apartment felt like a home again. Ava giggled as Linda chased her around, and I realized how much I'd missed the sound of someone else's laughter in our home. Linda and I sat on the couch, watching Ava play, an unspoken truce hanging between us. "You're doing a good job, Ellie," Linda said, breaking the silence. I shrugged. "I'm trying." "No, really. Jake, he's my nephew, but he's not doing right by you or Ava." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the pain in her eyes. She was an aunt, torn between her nephew and her grandchild, And despite everything, she was here, choosing us. Life after Linda's visit settled into a new kind of rhythm. Ava's laughter filled the gaps in our little home, and my days blurred with work and motherhood. I almost forgot about Jake, almost. Then came the call that pulled him back into our lives like a bad rerun of a show you never liked. "Miss Ellie, this is Harold Greer. I'm the executor of your late father-in-law's estate. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come in and discuss the will." The voice on the other end of the phone was formal, detached. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Of course, Mr. Greer. When do you need me?" "We've scheduled the reading this Thursday at 3 p.m. Will that work for you?" I agreed, though my mind was racing. What could possibly be in that will for me? Jake was the son. Surely he'd be the one to inherit. I shook the thoughts away and focused on getting through the week. Thursday came too fast. I sat in a stiff chair in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and old books. The room was quiet, too quiet. Jake sat across from me, a smug look on his face. He hadn't even said hello. Mr. Greer cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. I'll get straight to the point." He read through the legal jargon, and with each word, Jake's smile grew wider. But then, Mr. Greer said something that wiped the grin right off Jake's face. "And to my granddaughter, Ava, I bequeath the majority of my estate, including the family home and associated assets. To my son, Jake, I bequeath the ownership of my apartment on 5th Street, under the condition he maintains employment for a period of no less than 6 months." Jake's mouth dropped open. "What? That's it? The apartment? There's got to be some mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Jake. Your parents were very clear." Mr. Greer's voice was steady, unyielding. "But I'm his son. I'm supposed to get everything." Jake's voice was rising, a temper tantrum brewing. "Your father believed in hard work, Jake. He wanted to encourage you to stand on your own," I found myself saying, surprised at my own calmness. Jake turned on me. "This is your fault, Ellie. You turned them against me." Mr. Greer interjected. "Your parents made these decisions long before your separation, Jake." The room spun with the weight of the revelation. I was to manage a fortune for Ava, a future I could secure for her. And Jake, well, Jake was left with an apartment and a challenge. The days that followed were filled with a relentless barrage of calls and paperwork. Jake was furious, calling at all hours, his voice oscillating between begging and demanding. "Ellie, you have to talk to Greer. You have to get him to change this. It's not fair." Jake's voice was desperate one afternoon, the anger giving way to something that sounded like fear. "Jake, it's done. Your parents made their decision," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while Ava played in the background, blissfully unaware. "But you can do something. You have control over Ava's share, right? We're still married." He was grasping at straws, and we both knew it. "Even if I could, I wouldn't. This is for Ava's future, not for us. Not for you to squander," I replied, the finality in my voice feeling like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. He hung up with a string of words I was glad Ava couldn't understand. Severing ties with Jake was like cutting through a thick, gnarled vine that refused to let go. The divorce proceedings turned sour, with Jake's lawyers trying every trick in the book to get him a piece of Ava's inheritance. But my resolve was ironclad. I was fighting for my daughter now, not just for myself. The day we stood before the judge, Jake looked deflated, a shadow of the brash man who had demanded a divorce with such arrogance. The judge was a stern-faced woman who looked like she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Mr. Jake, it seems to me that you're trying to claim what has been clearly and legally bequeathed to your daughter," she said, after hearing Jake's lawyer out. He tried to argue, "But she's just a child. I'm her father, I should be." The court finds no reason to deviate from the will as it stands. The petition is denied. The judge cut him off, her gavel hitting the block with a thud that echoed in the silent courtroom. The dust had barely settled from the courtroom when the full weight of the will's revelation began to sink in. I was now not only the sole caretaker of Ava, but also the steward of her future. It was a daunting reality, a heavy mantle that I carried out of the courthouse that day. I sat down at our modest kitchen table, the sunlight filtering in and landing on the stacks of legal documents that spelled out Ava's inheritance. I shuffled through them, the words trust and estate leaping out at me. They felt alien, too grand for our simple life. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize flashing on the screen. I answered tentatively. "Miss Ellie? This is Janet from First Community Bank. We need to schedule an appointment to set up the trust for Ava." "Right, of course. When would be a good time?" I replied, feeling out of my depth. "How's Monday at 10 a.m.? We can go over everything and make sure you're comfortable with the process." Janet's voice was kind, reassuring. "Monday at 10 it is," I confirmed, a small part of me still in disbelief. Monday's meeting was a marathon of signatures and notaries, of terms like fiduciary and beneficiary. Janet was patient, walking me through each step. "You're doing a great thing for your daughter, Miss Ellie. This will secure her future," she said as we wrapped up. I smiled, a mix of pride and nervousness bubbling within. I just want to do what's best for her. That evening, as I watched Ava play, her innocence and joy untouched by the complexities of adult life, my phone rang again. It was Jake. "Ellie, can we talk?" His voice was subdued, almost unrecognizable. "Jake, I'm really busy with Ava right now. Can it wait?" I replied, not ready to let him disturb our peace. "It's about the inheritance and the apartment. I need some advice," he admitted, and I could hear the struggle in his words. I hesitated, then sighed. "Okay, Jake, what's going on?" "I'm thinking of selling the apartment. I don't know what to do," he said, and I could picture him running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Jake, that might not be a bad idea, but make sure you get some good advice on how to manage the money. Maybe put some aside for Ava, for the future." There was silence on the line for a moment. I hadn't thought of that. Thanks, Ellie. The calm before the storm. That's what life felt like in the weeks following the establishment of Ava's trust. The small oasis of peace was shattered one Tuesday morning when a process server showed up at my door with papers that screamed legal turmoil. I thumbed through the documents, each page a punch to the gut. Jake was contesting the will again, claiming that as Ava's father, he deserved a portion of the inheritance to ensure her well-being, in his hands. My hands shook with a cocktail of anger and fear as I dialed my lawyer's number. "Michael, it's Ellie. He's doing it again. He's suing for a part of Ava's inheritance," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. Michael's voice was a steady force. "Ellie, we knew he might pull something like this. We're ready. We'll fight this, and we'll win, just like last time." I took a deep breath, trying to absorb some of his confidence. "What's our next step?" "We meet, we plan, and we protect what Ava's grandparents wanted for her," he replied. The legal wrangling felt like a twisted game, one where Jake played the victim, pushed into a corner by life's unfairness. But this wasn't a game. This was my daughter's future. In court, Jake's lawyer painted a picture of a father sidelined from his daughter's life, cut off from the means to care for her. "Your Honor, my client merely seeks to provide for his daughter in a manner befitting the legacy left by her grandparents," the lawyer said, gesturing towards Jake with practiced sympathy. The judge turned to me. "Miss Ellie, do you wish to respond?" I stood, my legs firm despite the butterflies. "Your Honor, everything that has been done is in the best interest of my daughter, as outlined by her grandparents. Their wishes were clear, and I intend to honor them." The judge nodded, her gaze flicking between me and Jake. "I will review the case and render my decision. We're adjourned." Days later, the decision came down. The will would stand as it was. Jake's claims were dismissed. I called Linda to tell her the news, her voice weary when she answered. "We won, Linda. The judge sided with us again," I said. There was a pause, a heavy sigh. "I'm glad, Ellie. It's what my brother wanted, for Ava to be taken care of." I hung up the phone and watched Ava, her brow furrowed in concentration as she colored. This little girl, unaware of the battles being fought in her name, was the reason I'd weather the storms. And as the legal clouds cleared, I promised myself that I'd build a life for her so full of love and stability that no amount of turmoil could shake her foundation. Months had passed since the court upheld the will, and life had settled into a new, more peaceful pattern. The legal turmoil was behind us, and ahead lay the open road of new beginnings. I was sitting on the porch, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when Ava came bouncing out, her hair in pigtails and a grin on her face. "Mommy, look what I drew at school today," she exclaimed, thrusting a piece of paper into my hands. It was a drawing of the two of us, holding hands under a big, bright sun. "It's beautiful, Ava," I said, my heart swelling with love for this little person who had been my rock through the storm. "Miss Ellie, there's a call for you," called Mrs. Parker, our neighbor who had become a friend and sometimes babysitter. I walked inside, curious. "This is Ellie." "Miss Ellie, it's Janet from the bank. I wanted to let you know that the trust for Ava has been set up successfully, and we've made the first investment for her future education." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Janet. That's wonderful news." I hung up and went back outside to join Ava, who was now chasing fireflies as they began to light up the twilight. "Mommy, do you think Daddy will come to my birthday party?" Ava's question came out of nowhere, her voice hopeful yet uncertain. I paused, considering my words. "I don't know, honey, but we'll have a great party with or without him. The most important thing is that we're together." Ava nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and went back to her game. Later that evening, after Ava had fallen asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea and the last of the day's mail. There was a letter from Jake. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Ellie, I've been doing some thinking. I'm sorry for everything. I'm getting help, trying to get better. I won't bother you for money again. I hope I can be the father Ava deserves one day." Jake. I set the letter down, a complex mix of emotions churning inside me. Anger, relief, hope, each battling for prominence. I realized that Jake's journey was his own, and while I hoped he'd find his way for Ava's sake, my focus was on the life I was building for us. The next morning, Ava and I planted flowers in the garden, her laughter filling the air, mixing with the sound of the birds and the rustle of the leaves. It was a simple moment, but it was ours, and it was filled with the promise of a new day. As we patted down the last of the soil, I looked at our home, the garden, and my daughter, and I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but there would also be joy, growth, and love, the kind that survives even the darkest storms. "Mommy, will the flowers grow big?" Ava asked, looking up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Yes, Ava, with a little care and time, they'll grow big and strong, just like you," I said, taking her hand in mine.